Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we have taken up Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 19th of November 2020. The articles which we are going to cover today are displayed on the screen. Let us now begin the discussion.
There is an important announcement for all of you. The mains question assignment for this week has been uploaded on our website, that is elearn.rau'S.com. There is a link to the mains question in the description of the video as well. Alternatively, you can log in to elearn.rau'S.com, make a free basic account if you don't have one. Go to the mains assignment question, and the first question which you see is the assignment for this week. Credibility of Indian journalism is on decline mainly due to reduction in ethics. Discuss. The question is of 15 marks and it needs to be answered in 250 words. All those who will send the answers by Saturday will get the evaluation and the feedback from RAU'S teachers. If you want the reference for this particular question and if you are finding it difficult to answer it, this topic was discussed in DNS dated 20th of October 2020. So the first article which we have taken for today's discussion appears on page number 10. Finance Panel for PPPs on Health Infra. The 15th Finance Commission has mooted a greater role for public-private partnerships to ramp up health infrastructure and scale up public spending on health from currently dismal 0.95% to an optimum of 2.5% of GDP, and this has been stated by the chairperson of 15th Finance Commission, Mr. N.K. Singh. We all know that the report is not public. The report given by 15th Finance Commission is not in public domain, and so whatever information is seeping out is through the public interactions and the interviews given by the members of Finance Commission to the media houses, and this is one such instance. You should not forget that under GS2, issues related to health and education is mentioned in the syllabus, and hence it provides us an opportunity to visit what are the current challenges of health infrastructure in our country or the health sector, how PPP is going to or is expected to help these challenges, and then what are the challenges in public-private partnership as far as healthcare is concerned. So we are going to discuss these three dimensions in this particular discussion. So let us now begin by first understanding the present problems plaguing our health infrastructure, starting with lower expenditure on health. And here we are talking about lower public expenditure. Lower public expenditure means low spending by the government on the health care sector. So the combined expenditure of center and the states on health is around 1.5% of India's GDP currently. Whereas if you consider National Health Policy 2017, it envisioned the overall public expenditure on health to be around 2.5%. We are nowhere near that. Of course, given the fact that it has only been 2.5 years and also the COVID has happened, so the constraints are there on the center as well as states as far as increasing the expenditure is concerned. But still, what this has done is that it has led to higher out-of-pocket expenditure. So the out-of-pocket expenditure as a percentage of total healthcare expenditure is as high as 60% in India. Now this out-of-pocket expenditure, which is like a personal expenditure incurred by the people themselves, are mainly on account of purchasing medicines, conduct of diagnostic tests, and consultation fees given to the doctors in OPDs. Of course, had the expenditure in the public health been higher, the people would have got easily available free medicines, free tests, and also the better functioning primary healthcare would have ensured minimum consultation fees out of the personal pocket. So that is one of the main concerns of India's primary and secondary healthcare sector. Then the shortage of medical professionals or the human resource in healthcare sector has been a continuous source of problem for healthcare in India. Now, if you compare the number of qualified doctors per thousand of population of India with that of China and Italy, you will find there is a stark contrast. Italy has around 41 qualified doctors per thousand population as compared to dismally low 3.4 in India. Similarly, if you see the number of nursing staff we have per thousand population, it is less than 6% of what Italy has, and so there is an extreme shortage of medical professionals in our country. Then our healthcare infrastructure is also poor. Let's not go into what machines our hospitals have and what are the capabilities. Let's just keep our attention towards the number of hospital beds per 1 lakh population. If you see, India has only 70 beds per lakh population as opposed to China 420 and Italy 340. Similarly, the comparison of ICU beds per lakh population also reflects poorly on India's healthcare infrastructure. Then comes the issue of affordability, and it is here where the role of the private sector in healthcare comes into play. Now, if you see the contribution of private sector in healthcare expenditure in India is around 80%, while of course the rest 20% is contributed by the public sector. Now, the private sector provides for 58% of the hospitals and 81% of the doctors in India. Now, this could be a good news, but the problem is that the private sector hospitals work on profit motive and charge high fees. Hence, the private sector hospitals do not cater to the needs of the poor patients, and that is where the problem lies, because the majority of India is poor, and that is the problem. It becomes unaffordable to them, and hence comes the issue of accessibility. If you can't afford something, that thing becomes inaccessible to you. So one of the challenges of accessibility comes from economics, just because it is unaffordable. The second challenge comes from geography, because most of the secondary and tertiary care hospitals are located obviously in Tier 2 and Tier 1 cities, and hence they are inaccessible to most of the people living in rural areas. Simply can't afford, because distance is still a barrier. It is also a psychological barrier. People delay their treatment just because the distances are very large. Apart from that, most of the doctors who are well qualified are obviously unwilling to go and serve the rural areas, and so that is also a big problem. So in total, it creates an issue of accessibility for the poor and especially the rural poors. And then comes the new and emerging issue of demographic change going on in India right now. We all know that India is set to undergo demographic transition in the next 2 decades, wherein the share of elderly population is set to increase from current 8% to 16% in 2041. Not just that, the change in demography has been accompanied by increase in lifestyle diseases. We know that our eating pattern is changing. The way we work is changing. There is a sharp downfall in physical activity, and which has led to a lot of diabetic, high blood pressure, and even heart patients. And so these non-communicable lifestyle disease burden is increasing, and our healthcare currently is not equipped to deal with these two challenges. There is still a lack of geriatrics department in almost all the secondary and tertiary healthcare sectors, leaving the few big hospitals like AIIMS and other few. Also, the current health infrastructure is designed to mainly focus on communicable diseases, because those have been the focus of our health infrastructure, government policy, and even the population. The communicable epidemics have been the cause of concerns. And diseases like polio, smallpox, TB, all these have hogged the limelight of Indian healthcare. But as the contribution of these diseases are declining, including the HIV, there is a need to change the focus from communicable to non-communicable and lifestyle diseases. So these are the current challenges dealing with the healthcare sector in our country. So one of the ways through which these challenges can be overcome is public-private partnership in healthcare sector. We know that PPP model has been increasingly adopted in other sectors, for example, infrastructure like road constructions, bridge constructions. But so far in healthcare sector, the PPP is not a common phenomena, except the recent insurance scheme of the government of India, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya, that is a kind of PPP. So let us now understand what PPP in healthcare sector would imply. So, the public private partnership in the field of healthcare is a form of agreement between the government and the private sector, or between the public and the private sector. And that is for providing various healthcare services to the people. Of course, it seeks to leverage the private sector's strength of innovation and efficiency. And more often than not, it is like redefining the role of government. So currently, we expect the government to provide not only the services but also to finance them. But under PPP, the government will take the seat of financer and private sector will actually deliver the services and carry out the jobs on ground, just like the government hospitals are doing right now. Now, there are two main ways through which the PPP model can be brought in India. The first, of course, is contracting out the management of the government hospitals to the private sector. So right now, all the government hospitals are run and managed by the government. The employees working in a hospital, from janitor to the chief medical officer, all are government. And so in PPP, the employees of the hospital can be replaced by the private human resource who will manage day-to-day activities of the hospital and also cater to the needs of the people. And government will finance according to the services they have provided to the poor people. Another way to do that would be healthcare insurance, and this is what has been done in PM Jan Arogya Abhiyan, where the government provides healthcare insurance on secondary and tertiary treatment in private hospitals. So instead of giving the management of the government hospitals to the private sector, the government encourages the population to refer themselves to the private healthcare sector directly, and the government will pay the private healthcare sector for the services they have delivered. So these are the two mechanisms through which currently the PPP mode in healthcare sector is being explored. Now, since we have discussed so many issues and challenges plaguing healthcare sector, let us now look how PPP in healthcare sector would try and address some of these issues. So one of the basic problems with any kind of government department, be it land department, administration, police, or anywhere else, including the health infrastructure, is lack of efficiency. And this is the problem across the world, not just India. And it is often believed that private sector is much more efficient than the government sector in doing any task. And so it is believed that handing over of management of an existing public hospital to a well-established private partner under a PPP agreement would lead to increase in efficiency of these government-set hospitals. Now the question arises that if the management shall be handed over to the private sector, the issue of affordability will play a major role in dividing the access to the poor, and the solution to that problem could be to insert a capping clause in the agreement itself. The government could always choose to cap the charges of all the medicines, tests, and all other services being provided by the hospitals which are in PPP mode. And the terms and conditions of such an agreement could be put clearly on the paper. Now, the next important aspect is the inflow of investment finance into the healthcare sector from the corporates and the private sector. So, for example, government could invest in land and building. So, government could construct a new hospital, hand it over to the private partner, who will then bring equipment and the staff, which is the management. And then the responsibility of future investment, its upgradation, expansion would lie in the private sector hand. And so that would be a win-win situation for both, because most of the expenditure is incurred on management and not on the land and construction as far as hospitals are concerned. It is a very, very expensive affair to manage a hospital. And so it would also lead to a drastic reduction in the funds being shelled out from the public expenditure. Apart from investment, finance, and efficiency, the involvement of private sector in government hospital is going to bring the cutting-edge novel technology to the government hospitals. Due to issues related to the acquisition and delays, the novel technologies are often denied to the government hospitals. When they reach, it has already been very late. And so, for the novel technology to reach the government-run hospitals quickly, it is important for them to collaborate with the private sector, because it is there where the research and development is taking place. So, for example, Srinath Reddy Committee in 2011 on universal health coverage had recommended for creation of robust IT infrastructure, which could capture various aspects related to healthcare infrastructure such as mortality rate, hospital admission rates, disease profiles, hospital bed occupancy ratios. Now you can easily understand what kind of a gargantuan task it is going to be. It is going to be a massive job. It will involve high level computation. And can it be expected of a government sector or any department of the government, be it DATI or even NIC, it cannot be expected from them to come up with such a large scale and robust IT infrastructure. You will have to involve private sector into not only the data collection but also the programming and its final implementation. And so that is one of the ways to demonstrate that how the involvement of the private sector can lead to enhancement of technology. Of course, efficiency, investment and finance has been discussed earlier. So now it is easy to see that how involvement of private sector into the public health is going to go a long way in addressing the challenges of the healthcare sector. But it is not a panacea. It is not without its own set of issues. And let us now discuss the issues with the PPP in healthcare sector. And so these four set of issues are the main challenges which the PPP in healthcare, if implemented, will face and will definitely face. And the first is the perceived division of responsibilities. If you see, both the government and the private sector have a very flawed perception that the government has the responsibility of the primary healthcare sector, the sector which caters to the majority of the people, and if done right, most often than not, you don't need to go to the secondary and tertiary level. Whereas if you see the private sector or the hospitals in the private sector, they consider themselves mainly responsible and accountable for secondary and tertiary healthcare sector. There are very less service providers in primary healthcare sector. Most of them are individual doctors practicing in isolation. There is no hospital in private sector which caters only to the primary sector or in rural areas. And such a flawed perception has to be done away with if we want to ensure the success of PPP, especially in the primary healthcare sector in rural areas. So that is one of the challenge. Next set of challenge comes from the lack of trust, misconception and cooperation between the private and the government sector. Now, in the perception of the government, the private sector caters to the rich sections and the wealthy part of the society because it is profit oriented, and it is rightly so. It is a private venture meant for profit. And so, according to the government, the main ambition and the aim of the private healthcare, just like any other private company, is to maximize their profit. On the other hand, the private sector believes that the government introduces a lot of regulations which restrict the freedom to operate freely in a market. And so, when they will enter into the PPP, this tussle will not be resolved and it will create trouble in the effective implementation of any kind of PPP agreement. Just all the other PPP in other infrastructure sector have been scuttled due to the lack of trust. Then there are a lot of constraints which come from the government as well as from the private sector. If you focus on the constraints coming from the government side as far as implementation of PPP in healthcare is concerned, first and foremost, there is a clear lack of political will. Of course, since most of the things in political arena is determined by vote bank politics, most of the politicians are quite skeptical regarding the entry of the private sector in the public sphere. Then in the past, the experience of public-private partnerships have not been that great. In the past, the government has not been able to design a proper agreement or a contract to manage PPPs, and which have led to a lot of court cases. And so when a simple contract of a construction of a highway project and a PPP agreement for that could not be properly designed, forecasting the revenues was not so easy, how can we expect government to come up with a robust agreement in case of healthcare infrastructure where thousands and lakhs of people visit each day, they have different issues, they need different treatments and tests, and so it is going to be quite a difficult job to design a robust agreement for PPP in healthcare sector. Then of course, if the government is going to enter into PPP, it is going to pay for the services private sectors have provided to the people. And like other tenders and like other agreements, there has always been a delay in payment from the government side, which is going to restrict the participation of private players in healthcare sector. And then India has so far not been able to adopt evidence-based pricing mechanism for services being provided in the healthcare sector. So you must have heard or even experienced exorbitant prices being charged for very simple procedures, and there is total discretion of hospital in that. A same procedure, same operation can cost around twice or thrice depending upon the kind of hospital that was chosen. And so there is a lack of evidence-based pricing. Unless and until we do that, the PPP in healthcare will not be effective. There has to be a standardization of pricing based on the evidences. And the final constraint comes from the private sector itself. The private players are always disinclined to enter into an area where the prices are capped. They just hate the capping, and there is no denying the fact that if the government will enter into PPP with the healthcare sector, it is going to cap the prices, and so there will be limited financial incentive for the private sector to engage, especially on a large scale and in rural areas, and so it will quite limit the potential of PPP in healthcare sector. So now the question arises as to what should be the way forward, and of course the way forward comes from the challenges. And if you see the challenges, there are many areas where the government can take various steps which will reduce the challenges in PPP healthcare sector. To start with, the government can come up with a robust agreement design which will make it very difficult for the private sector to violate the terms and conditions. Then the government can come up with evidence-based pricing mechanism to be imposed throughout our country. So this discussion mainly revolved around the current challenges in the healthcare sector, how many of those issues and challenges can be addressed by the involvement of the private sector through PPP mode in healthcare sector, but then still it would not be sufficient because there are challenges in the PPP for healthcare as well. As a way forward, the government of India can design better agreements and can introduce evidence-based pricing mechanism to reduce the constraints put forward in front of PPP model. Let us now move on to the next discussion. The need for maximum government appears on page number 7. This article delves into the steps taken by the government in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic and how that step, particularly the Atmanirbhar Bharat, is not going to be very effective in bringing the economy of India on track. And author in his support has very credible evidences and also the observations which rightly indicate or highlight the flaws of the Atmanirbhar Bharat scheme floated out by the government in last 4 to 5 months. So we shall first understand the argument being put forward by the author, and then we will look into the suggestions given by the author in the same article. So according to the author, though a lot of economic relief measures have been announced through various tranches of Atmanirbhar Bharat, however, government has left the onus, that is the burden has been left on the people to earn the relief by first doing or adhering to the government's preconditions. So they are not a set of cash transfers. So if you see most of the measures being announced, especially in the Atmanirbhar Bharat 1.0, they are in the form of either a credit guarantee or liquidity easing. So here the government has assumed that these measures will motivate business sector to invest and hence kick-start the economy through increased spending and hence the consumption. But according to the author, the expectations that these measures will induce the investment is far away from the reality. For example, let's consider the corporate investment. The corporate investment is contingent or dependent upon two things. The first is sales. If the sales are high, then the corporates are motivated or the private companies get motivated to invest more, to produce more. And the next set of investments or the another source of investment for the corporate sector or the private companies is through credits from the bank and NBFCs. Now what government has done is that made it easier for the corporates and cheaper for the corporates to get the credit from the bank. But due to the extended lockdown and uncertain future, the sales of most of the products are still very low. Since the sales are low, which means that the factories are already running below the capacity. And so if the existing capacity is not being fully utilized, why would a corporate or a business house would think of investing in another plant or in another machinery? It would simply not think of increasing the production if the current inventory is not being used up. Similarly, for the MSME sector, To assume that making the loans cheaper is going to increase the investment of corporate and the MSME sector is a flawed expectation. Similarly, as far as households are concerned, they too won't take any new loan as their source of income is doubtful in the current scenario. This despite the fact that the loans have become cheaper. Of course, they will definitely look at their repaying capacity and not the low interest rate being offered. If you're not sure of a regular salary in the immediate or in near future, so if you're not expecting a regular salary in the near future, you're not going to take loans even if they are relatively cheaper. And so, if household is not going to take car loans or the home loans, not only the sales will be down, but also various sectors, for example, the construction sector will keep languishing for the dearth of investment. So this is as far as the demand for the loans or the credit is concerned. What about the supplies, which is mainly done through banks? And according to the author, the capacity and the ability of the banks to lend is also very, very constrained, and also willingness to lend. Consider this. For example, banks are already reeling under the NPA problem, and that is a perpetual problem since last 1 decade. In fact, to cover for the losses of the previous NPAs, the banks have chosen not to pass on the fall in policy rate to the consumers. So whatever the reduction in the rate RBI did has not been passed. The banks haven't lowered the interest on loans so as to keep enough profit margin to recover the previous NPAs. What does this indicate? This indicates that not only the benefits will not be passed, but the future lending will also be very, very cautious. There is going to be a very, very high scrutiny in lending out the amount from the banking side. And hence, according to the author, these credits, guarantees, or even cheap loans will hardly have any impact on the reviving the demand in the economy. Although there is no denying the fact that they can of course act as a catalyst to fasten the process. But left to themselves, they are not enough to start the process or the kick-start the investment in the economy. And so author has suggested 3 measures which can be taken. First and foremost, author insists on suspension of adherence to FRBM. So FRBM, or Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act 2003, aims to introduce transparency in India's fiscal management system. We all know that. The Act's long-term objective is for India to achieve fiscal stability. It has set a lot of targets as far as the fiscal management of our country is concerned, which constrain the ability of the government to spend. But the government has power to amend the FRBM Act, get rid of the limits or postpone the targets, which the government has done many times in the past. And so again, author insists that FRBM guidelines should be suspended for a while and a fiscal stimulus of at least 10 lakh crore should be injected, either by borrowing or by monetizing the benefit or printing more money. So what should be the objective of this fiscal stimulus? Why the author wants the government to spend so much to the tune of 10 lakh crore added on to the earlier budget? According to the author, this stimulus could comprise, among other things, free ration and other essentials like oil, soap and cooking for a period of 6 months. It could also include cash transfer till employment opportunities are back, and definitely an urban employment guarantee scheme on the line of MG Narega. Then author insists on utilizing this COVID pandemic year in creating a robust health infrastructure, and this quite correlates with the last discussion we just had. It insisted on creation of health infrastructure throughout the country, but through utilization of private sector. But in this case, the author insists on public investment in creation of robust health infrastructure. According to the author, the current trend of moving along the path of United States, which is the insurance route being adopted by PM Jan Arogya Yojana, we should adopt the British way of providing the healthcare, which is completely public, nationalized, owned and controlled by the government. Then according to the author, pandemic has given us the opportunity to think about the climate change, and now the focus of the government should be on the climate action. Author wants various mechanisms to be imposed right now because the industrial activity right now is at its minimum. And so before they start producing on a larger scale, there needs to be various steps which not only change the energy mix of the economy but also makes the poor and the marginalized a part of sustainable development process. For example, imposition of carbon tax on various polluting industries. So according to the author, since everything has stalled, the economy has its minima, the industrial production is very low, this COVID crisis provide us with an opportunity to rethink our health, economic as well as climate policies. And according to the author, it will be like a fresh start. Let us now move on to the next discussion. Two articles appear on page number 6: Decoding Biden's Presidency for India and the World, and New Challenges, both of which talk about the future course of action as far as India and US relations are concerned. And both articles highlight almost the similar things, which mainly deal with the convergences in the interests of US and India and how they are going to shape the relationship between India and US. Although there are some issues which both the articles think would create hurdles. For example, we know that Joe Biden belonged to Democratic Party and he has openly expressed himself against Indian government on various occasions, mainly with respect to the actions related to Citizenship Amendment Act, NRC, and also the way the special status of Jammu and Kashmir was diluted. Now we know that under International Relations section of paper GS2, bilateral relations are very important. Consider this: in 2018, UPSC had asked, Israel's relations with Israel have of late acquired a depth and diversity which cannot be rolled back. Discuss. In 2019, UPSC had asked, the time has come for India and Japan to build a strong contemporary relationship, one involving global and strategic partnerships that will have a great significance for Asia and the world as a whole. Comment. So you can see that almost every year, the bilateral relationship of India with an important country is one of the most probable topics which can be asked in mains examination. And similarly for mains 2020, India-US relations have become very, very important. And so we are going to discuss various pillars of bilateral relations, and we will see what are the convergence written in blue color and what are the divergences between India and US written in red colors. Now you should understand that the direction which relationship between two nations takes is dependent on various factors. Of course, role of leaders of the two nations are very, very important, and also the personal chemistry between the two leaders. But the two leaders cannot take two nations away if they have strong defense ties, economic ties, like-minded thinking on strategic matters as well as on various other international matters. And so although the personal approach of the leaders are very, very important, but the pillars on which the relationship between two nations is dependent also play a key role. And with the change of president in United States of America, these things are unlikely to change. Some things will change and we will see how they will help or hurt India. There are certain things which you should understand. The convergence in the foreign policy of India and US is not just out of interest in international matters. We share common democratic values. Also, there is a strong people-to-people ties between the two nations. There are around 4 million people of Indian origin or Indian citizens residing currently in US, and election of Kamala Harris as the vice president is a reflection of that fact. And so we are not going to discuss the cultural as well as people-to-people relations, because currently what dominates the relationship is the matter of defense, economy, strategy and nuclear power. And let us go into them one by one. So the convergence of the interests between India and US are written in blue color on the right hand side. And so in the past few decades, the strengthening of the relationship between India and US is indicated by the increasing role the arms import from US is playing into India's defense policy. America has become second largest arms supplier to India. Not only that, just last week we have concluded 4 sets of foundational agreements with United States of America. And conclusion of these 4 sets of foundational agreements like COMCASA, LIMUA, BECA and ISA have increased the depth of the defense ties with America. But that is not to suggest that there is no issue as far as defense ties are concerned. India has always been wary of arms sale to Pakistan. Not just the arms sale, but very high-end technology is often sold to Pakistan by American companies, and that has always been a cause of concern, and the best example would be the F-16 fighter jets. After defense ties, if we analyze our economic relations, it is growing at a very, very rapid pace. USA is India's largest trading partner. The bilateral trade in goods and services has grown by more than 10% per annum over the past 2 years to reach $142 billion in 2018. So that is a very, very big demonstration of the good economic ties with America. We know that American firms are already a major job creator in our country, especially in services sector. Not just that, the investment by Indian firms and companies are increasing in USA. And so we can say that the economic intermingling of India and United States is mutual and it is from both the sides. But that is not to suggest that there are no issues. Recently, in his only term as president, Mr. Trump has left no stone unturned to designate India as a tariff king. The import barriers imposed by our country has always been a problem for America, and they have always opposed any such kind of barrier, especially on American imports. We know that earlier India used to get certain privileges as far as its exports to USA is concerned, but last year India was removed from generalized system of preferences status by America. Now this removal has created a big trouble for Indian exports to US because India was the largest beneficiary of GSP, because over 1/10 of US goods imports from India entered duty free under this particular program, and GSP removal has reinstated the American import duties on Indian exports, and it has put our MSME sector and handicraft sector under a lot of pressure. Then from time to time, United States Trade Representative Office or USTR comes up with Section 301 investigations against India. Most recently, the investigation against India was started for imposing digital services taxes that may affect American companies. Earlier, Section 301 investigations have come up due to lack of enforcement of intellectual property rights by our country. Then various kinds of subsidies, agricultural subsidies, manufacturing subsidies have been challenged from time to time by US at WTO. And so, these issues are still unresolved. There is no indication as to where Mr. Joe Biden is going to move on these matters, but since the corporate lobby not only funds the elections but also employs a lot of people, and so it would be unfair to expect that there will be a U-turn on these matters. Let us now look at the strategic aspect of the relationship of India and US. So first and foremost is that America has openly supported India's entry in international organization, whether it is regarding UNSC reforms or it is about entry into nuclear supplier group. America has openly supported India. So that shows a kind of convergence. Also, not only that, both countries have become more vocal in their support for freedom of navigation, including in the South China Sea. They both have concerns and big concerns about China's Belt and Road Initiative and share similar views about free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Not only that, India is seen as a pillar of America's pivot to Asia policy. So there lies the strategic convergences. But the convergences end there. There are a lot of issues which demonstrate that they have to go a long way from here. First is India's still continuing and a big dependence on Russia, especially in matters of defense. We know that most of our defense weapons and communication systems are derived from Russia or earlier from Soviet Union. And so India continues to have a big dependence on Russia. Even now, if you see, India has placed order for S-400 missile systems even after the objections from US. And so there have been threats of sanctions under CAATSA or countering America's adversary through Sanctions Act, which is a United States federal law that imposes restrictions or sanctions on Iran, North Korea and Russia. But it also includes sanctions against countries that engage in significant transactions with these three nations. And so we know that India's transaction with Russia is very significant. And so we'll see how the future president of United States of America resolves this particular issue. The deteriorating relationship of America and Iran has caused big trouble for our country, and that is one of the bases of the divergences of the foreign policy between these two nations. America and Iran view each other as extremely hostile and as an adversary to each other, whereas India sees Iran as a partner in matters of Afghanistan and also most important source of energy, that is petroleum and gas. But due to American sanctions, India had to cut down its oil imports from Iran, and that is also one of the divergences or the differences between the approach of these two nations. Then we know that America is critically dependent on Pakistan for Afghanistan. If it wants to exit Afghanistan in a timely manner, America has to depend on Pakistan. Pakistan will not only provide the proper exit route but also controls Taliban. And so America needs the help of Pakistan in order to engage Taliban into talks and into peace deals. Until the time Americans are embroiled in Afghanistan, the dependence of America on Pakistan will continue, and hence the divergence between India and US also. Then in matters of nuclear energy, a nuclear deal was signed in 2008, which was a watershed moment in the bilateral relation of India and US. Despite the historic nuclear deal, civilian nuclear cooperation has not taken off. India entered into an agreement with an American firm Westinghouse to build 6 nuclear reactors on Indian soil has not moved ahead because India has enacted nuclear liability clause. Because India passed the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damage Act in 2010 with its focus on setting liabilities on suppliers in case of a nuclear accident, and American companies want these nuclear liability laws to go before which they can invest. And so that has created a big issue in the matter of nuclear relation. Then there are some issues which do not have any convergence, and that deals with internal issues of India and the approach of United States of America on climate change. India generally adopts the policy of no interference in other countries' internal matters, and so it expects the same from other countries as well. But from time to time, various American institutions have commented on the status of religious freedoms, especially of minorities in our country. The recent abrogation of special status of Jammu and Kashmir and conduct of NRC and passage of Citizenship Amendment Act has also led to a lot of reports in America by various non-governmental organizations and also by government bodies, which has not gone down well with the government of India. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Joe Biden belongs to Democratic Party, which is left-leaning or liberal party in American political system, as opposed to Mr. Donald Trump, who belongs to a Republican Party, which is more of a conservative party. And so with the arrival of Mr. Joe Biden, it seems like these issues will get prominence. Also, in his election manifesto, Mr. Joe Biden had raised the issue of Jammu and Kashmir and rights of religious minorities in our country. But it still remains to be seen that after election what he will do. We all know that US had withdrawn itself from the Paris climate deal. The early track record of Mr. Joe Biden shows that he is very serious on climate change, and the presidency of Joe Biden could see the coming back of America and adoption of Paris climate deal by that country. And so we should see some positive action in this direction. So all in all, the relationship between India and US is so multidimensional that a particular leader cannot in a single term change its direction. But the way or the pace in which the relationship moves in that particular direction can of course vary.
Chhath celebration appears on page number 3.
Now, Chhath, being an ancient Hindu festival historically native to Indian subcontinent, becomes very important. Consider this. In 2018 prelims, UPSC had given the traditions and the state, and you were supposed to match them correctly, and one of them was festival. Similarly, in 2017, UPSC had given 3 festivals on the left hand side and their communities, and you had to match them correctly. So you can see that under art and culture in 2018 and in 2017 the festivals have been asked. Chhath Puja, being a very prominent festival in the state of Bihar, Jharkhand, UP and also in Nepal, becomes very important from the perspective of UPSC examination. So, as far as the deity is concerned, the Chhat Puja is dedicated to the solar deity Surya and Shashti Devi or Shashti Maya in order to thank them for bestowing the bounties of life on earth and to request the granting of certain wishes. Now, an important aspect of Chhat Puja is that it does not involve and it is devoid of any kind of idol worship, and it is mainly dedicated to the worship of sun god along with its two consorts Usha, which means the dawn, and Pratyusha, which means the dusk. Because it is believed that the main sources of sun's powers are his wife Usha and Pratyusha respectively. So in the morning, people worship the first ray Usha, and in the evening they worship the last ray Pratyusha. This particular festival includes holy bathing, fasting, and abstaining from drinking water throughout. It also involves standing in water for a very long periods of time and offering prasad and argh to the setting and the rising sun. It is important to keep in mind that it is a unique festival which lasts over 4 days, and all these days have different names. It starts with the first day, which is Nahai Khai, then Kharna, then Sandhya Arghya, and then finally the last day or the fourth day as Usha Arghya. If we talk about the significance of this particular festival, there are three main reasons why it is very significant. The first is the eco-friendly characteristic of this festival. There are no crackers, there is no colors. So environmentalists have claimed that the festival of Chhat is one of the most eco-friendly religious festival which should be utilized to spread the message of conservation of nature and the climate. Then another important aspect is that it is one of the few Hindu festivals that transcends the rigid caste system. Every devotee belonging to any caste prepares almost similar prasad and other items to offer the Almighty. Another important aspect of this festival is that it is celebrated across many countries, because from this region, from Bihar, Jharkhand and eastern UP, people have been migrating, have been taken by Britishers across various continents, and wherever they are, they still celebrate the Chhat Puja, and so it has led to the spread of Indian cultures in the foreign lands. Let's now move on to the next news. An image appears on page number 1, which shows a Kashmiri vendor selling kangris, which is a traditional fire pot used by the Kashmiris. It says that people fill kangris with lighter charcoal to keep themselves warm during the winter. Since kangri or the kangar is a traditional craft used locally in Kashmir, it becomes very important from art and culture perspective. So a kangar, also known as kangri, is an earthen pot woven around with a wicker filled with hot embers used by Kashmiris beneath their traditional clothing to keep the chill at bay, which is also regarded as a work of art. It is a traditional craft. We know that Kashmir is extremely cold. If you look at the temperatures right now, it is sub 5 degrees Celsius, and it is going to worsen in coming 15 to 20 days, and temperatures would be sub zero. And hence, in order to keep a person comfortable, the kangri is normally kept inside the feran or the Kashmiri cloak or inside a blanket. As far as the major towns or the centers famous for the production of kangri or the kangar is concerned, it is Charare Sharif and Anantnag. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Let's now move on to the question of the day.